Thanks, Greg. All right, that completes question number 4, and yeah. And the next person up to answer the question will be John. Okay? No, John's going to be answering. Go ahead and ask.
Walt Kasha. I'm a 20-year resident of Hermosa. I realize the economic study will cover the overall financial impact of the oil drilling proposal. But with a potential settlement for Hermosa Beach to pay $17 million if the voters continue the oil ban, or $3 million if the ban is lifted, what ideas do you have to minimize the financial impact of the settlement on the city, given that there are only limited sources of revenue?
Thank you.
Yeah, John?
You will. And that is the question, isn't it? Because depending on whether or not, on that vote, if we are faced with $17 million, we are simply going to have to make arrangements to get the loan, to pay the interest on that, and pay that off over approximately 20 years is what I understand. And whereas that will not bankrupt the city as we once feared, it is certainly going to seriously impact the city. And that means that lots of projects, we're down 7 officers, for instance, right now in the police department. I'm not sure where we get the money to hire up 7 more officers. If we're looking at redoing the Civic Center, I'm not sure where that money, I think we're just going to be, think of a family and the dad just got laid off. You're just going to have to tighten up everything in the house. You're going to have to cut the budget as much as you can. You're not going to the movies, and you're going to eat a lot of macaroni and cheese. It's just the nature of it, because there's no place else we're going to draw that kind of income from. But the voters already know that. So this is simply a trade-off. It's up to you to make up your mind, and you know the implications, and if you're willing to take on those sacrifices, then that's the way you vote. If you're not, then that's the way you vote. But it's definitely something that's going to affect all our plans from 1 year from November on out. So it does require comment. And again, health issues and so forth are going to be trumping everything. But get your answers and then weigh it out, knowing that it affects not just the future of Hermosa for the next year or 2, but 20 or 30. So it is a major question. I want to make sure you all get the facts. Don't make up your minds too early, because it is a highly impactful decision, and we all have to make that decision.
Thanks, John. Jeff?
Thank you, Al. Well, a couple of things. I just wanted an observation, I guess, going in. I think the city has done a very poor job of giving us an alternate picture of what our city will look like economically, should this measure not go forward. But I thought there was an interesting discussion that some of you may have heard in the last meeting by our city manager, who is a financial guy, who essentially made an analogy with Mammoth Lakes. And Mammoth Lakes, as you may know, had a similar analogous situation. It wasn't oil, but they, because of a contract they violated, they were sued, and there was a $43 million judgment against the city. And the city immediately filed for bankruptcy. And as part of that process, they went to mediation. And through mediation, they settled for $29.5 million. And to pay for the situation, they took out a loan, 23 years, at 5.17% interest. After 23 years, they're going to be paying this company $48.5 million, more than what the settlement would have been. But one of the other ways to look is that if we were to look at our situation over the same term, using the same scenario in terms of the loan for, same interest rate over 23 years, $11.5 million, we've already put away in just 1 year, 1/3 of what the 17 is. That I believe it comes out to, and this is if the figures are off, blame the city manager.
You can summarize, Jeff.
It comes at $18.9 million, and if you look at that out of the yearly budget, it's $820,000. Not a small sum, manageable. Doesn't impact services. It means we've got to get smart about how we develop business in our city to make up whatever margins we have to do. But again, we are not at risk of bankruptcy based on this settlement. We would have never made this settlement if that was even a remote possibility. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Carolyn?
So the most likely scenario, it would seem to me, is that we would probably float a general obligation bond that requires a 2/3 vote of the community. I mean, that's probably the most likely scenario. So in terms of the impact it would have on us, we definitely want to have more development because that will bring in more revenues for our town. So when we look at areas of our town, properties that sit vacant, that's lost revenues. So when we talk about transformation in our downtown, if we can drive that, that's revenues, that's all top line. So I think we should move more aggressively towards revenue generation. And then on the other side, on the cost side, our costs are on a tremendous trajectory. If we look forward 15, 20 years in the future, if we don't get those costs under control, it's not a good thing for us. So in kind of an ironic way, this would force a lot of financial discipline upon us, which I think is not a bad thing. Municipalities across this country are all in the same position where they have overpromised and underdelivered, and nobody is doing anything to resolve it. In this town, if this actually forces us to start changing some of the ways we've structured contracts, then actually we come out of this 30 years from now possibly in a better footing because it finally forced financial discipline.
Thanks, Carolyn. Haney?
First, I think Councilman DeCloux addressed the issue regarding the presentation by the city manager, and I urge everybody to take a look at it. I think the city manager said he's going to post it on the website, so it may be there by now, but basically it addresses how the city is planning to basically pay the settlement, assuming that our vote is no. And the city manager is very clear, and as Councilman DeCloux mentioned, bankruptcy is not even on the horizon. We're not anywhere near bankruptcy, and the payments will get paid along the lines of the numbers that Councilman DeCloux mentioned. And also just to emphasize how well we have it. We don't have it all that bad. The city, because of the ongoing McPherson litigation, has not been able to get any debt. Basically, our credit was bad, so we couldn't go out there to a bank and get a loan. So basically we have zero debt, which is now a nice problem to have. The city owns $80 million worth of assets, which is also significantly higher than the amount of settlement that's owed. And the city budget on an annual basis is roughly about $25 million. So even though $17.5 million is a lot of money, if you put it in perspective with the city assets and where the city stands right now, it's payable without significant, or actually without, I would say without any impact on our quality of life. There will be, maybe tightening of the belts a little bit, but it's not going to change the way you live in the city every day. As far as what we can do to generate revenue to make up for it, there's two things that come to mind, and I'm sure there's a lot of other things.
Can you summarize anything?
One is the city yard that would be used for drilling. It's at 1.3 acres. And it would have been used for 35 years. Now it's going to be our property used for 35 years, and we can think of ideas to generate revenue out of that property that now we can actually have and use for whatever it is that we need to use. And the second thing is TOT taxes, which is hotel taxes. Right now, our number for hotel tax is 9%. It's lower than any other city in our area. Hawthorne, Lawndale, other cities have 11, 12%. San Francisco has that at 14%. We are at the 9% TOT tax. With existing hotels and hopefully new hotels coming in, if we increase the TOT tax, that's a significant revenue generation for our city.
Thanks, Haney. Greg?
Yeah, it was pointed out to me at a meeting last night that we're into this for $3 million already. So the real increment we're worried about is the $14 million. A lot of people jump to the 17.5, but we're going to pay the $3 million anyway, whether win or lose the election. So the number is really $14 million that we're focused on. And so I think it's important to not use fear to influence the vote. I don't think that's what you need to do. There, as you're hearing from most of us up here, there is no real fear of bankruptcy. The city has been and has always been throughout the entire recession in the black. I was, as your chief of police, I was in all the budget hearings. I listened. I know where the money is spent. We did budget tightening. We've done a lot of things. They've done many things to lower our obligations, and they did a fine job. Jeff is right. We spent nearly $1 million a year in litigation expense during the time that we were fighting this lawsuit. So to take that million and apply it to the $820,000 that it balances out, we could pay it off in 14 years if we just went that way. In essence, we can get a loan now that our credit is clear and there's no threat over us, and we can buy out the loan right away. and pay it in smaller payments, but the money is there to take care of business. And just briefly, Hanny is correct, our TOT is the lowest in the area. That also requires a vote of the community, not just a vote of council. We have to vote to allow you to vote on raising that debt, so if you don't like the idea, you can say no. The other two top revenue generators in the city are your property tax. You can generate a lot of revenue when people come in and remodel and rebuild their homes without increasing density, just turning over the properties that were bought many, many years ago. Again, going to my real estate background, people that bought properties at low dollar amounts, who rehab them or rebuild them and then resell them to modern families, are going to change the real estate values in the community and raise the revenue the city draws, and that's our number one revenue source, property tax.
Thanks, Greg. Nanette?
There was a discussion on whether the number was $3.5 million or $17.5 million with a $14 million difference. I don't see it that way. I think when you think about what it's going to cost if we allow it to happen, it's not really $3.5 million. You need to take into consideration and add the amount of money that we're going to lose, the millions of dollars that we're going to lose in the value of the city maintenance yard where it is now, as well as where it's going to go. And that's the storage facility next to City Hall, and the value that we could have had from that land, and the income that we get from that land. So I think at the end of the day, it's not really $3.5 million. It's going to be much more than that. As far as minimizing impacts, a lot of that was covered. We have already $6 million set aside. We have money that was not used last year that I understand could potentially be used, another $3 million. The shortfall will be small. And as an attorney, I've read the settlement agreement. I know that it says you can pay over a reasonable commercial amount of time. So that will allow us to pay any shortfall over the long haul. These are the other things we can do as well that was mentioned is really increasing our revenue stream. A lot of people don't realize, but here in Hermosa Beach, our number one source of revenue is actually off of PCH. Hotels and car dealerships are very high sources of revenue. The best example I like to give is we used to have BMW here. They were a large source of revenue. They were great. If I can use my business experience to attract and retain businesses like that, that will help the situation here as well and will minimize any kind of an impact.
Thanks, Nanette. That finishes that question. Are there